In the not-so-distant future, the skies over Earth were suddenly filled with massive, gleaming ships that hovered silently above major cities. The world was thrown into chaos as the mysterious alien vessels appeared without warning. Across the globe, panic spread like wildfire. Governments scrambled to respond, activating every weapon and defense system at their disposal. Satellites fired beams of energy toward the alien ships, and advanced fighter jets streaked through the air, their engines roaring in defiance. However, none of these efforts had any effect. The aliens, who identified themselves as the Zokthar, displayed no fear as they effortlessly swatted away every attack with a simple flicker of their energy manipulation. The weapons humans had relied on for years seemed laughably weak in comparison to the alien technology. Earth's mightiest forces, which had once seemed invincible, were now helpless against this superior power. As the Zokthar ships loomed above, their ominous presence cast a shadow over the entire planet. Military leaders around the world, once confident in their ability to protect their nations, could do little but watch in stunned disbelief. The aliens made no move to attack, not yet. Instead, they spoke, their voices carrying over every communication channel, filling the airwaves with an unsettling calmness. They declared that they had come to claim Earth for themselves, to take control of the planet and its resources, for reasons that were unknown to humanity. They spoke with such confidence, as if it was a mere formality. Their words were cold and dismissive, almost mocking. The Zokthar announced that they had observed humanity's futile attempts at defense and found it amusing. Earth's efforts, once thought to be a testament to human strength, were nothing more than a child's play in the eyes of these invaders. As the world's leaders gathered for an emergency summit, the mood was grim. A sense of helplessness hung in the air, as if humanity's fate had already been sealed. What could they do? How could they possibly fight back against an enemy that could neutralize their most powerful weapons with a mere thought? Reports flooded in from across the globe, detailing how the Zokthar's ships moved effortlessly through Earth's atmosphere, their massive forms casting a shadow over entire cities. Military bases had been obliterated without a single shot being fired. Defense systems meant to protect humanity's most vital structures had been torn apart with little more than a flash of light. It wasn't just the technology, it was the sheer ease with which the aliens dominated every attempt to resist. On the ground, people stared up at the ships with a mix of awe and terror. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the alien crafts in the sky. Some people whispered that they had seen alien figures in the windows of the ships, but these were mere rumors, fragments of images that only deepened the mystery. No one knew what the Zokthar wanted, or if they even cared. Were they invaders, or simply conquerors looking for a new world to control? Whatever their intentions, it was clear that they viewed Earth's defenses as little more than a joke. World leaders tried to negotiate, sending messages of peace and offering Earth's resources in exchange for safety, but their words were ignored. The Zokthar had no need for negotiations. They were not interested in diplomacy, nor in the petty concerns of the humans they had come to conquer. Earth's leaders were powerless to do anything but listen as the alien fleet hovered silently, overhead, waiting for the inevitable. A wave of despair swept through the room as humanity realized the terrible truth. They had no real means of defense. The world had placed its trust in technology, but in the face of a force far beyond their understanding, technology alone wasn't enough. The aliens had come to claim Earth, not as visitors, but as rulers, and they were not in a hurry. As the leaders of the world watched helplessly, a single sentence echoed through every channel, spoken in unison by the Zokthar. "You are not prepared. We will take what is ours." The finality of those words hung in the air like a death sentence. There was no question now. The Zokthar had no need to fight. They had already won. They didn't need to waste time on human resistance. They would take Earth, and humanity had no choice but to accept their fate. Fear spread through every nation. People held their breath, uncertain of what would come next. But one thing was clear: Earth's struggle for survival had just begun. No one could have predicted the twists and turns that would follow, but one thing was certain: humanity was about to face the greatest challenge of its existence. While the world trembled under the shadow of the Xokthar invasion, a small group of individuals met in secret at a hidden research facility deep within a mountain range, far from the prying eyes of the invaders. The world's cities were crumbling, and governments were scrambling to accept their fate. But here, a handful of humans dared to fight back. They called it Project Phoenix, a weapon so powerful that its existence had been kept a closely guarded secret for years, even from the leaders of Earth. The team was led by Dr. Elena Kovac, a brilliant physicist whose mind had long been at the forefront of humanity's technological advancements. Alongside her was General Marcus Hale, a former military commander known for his sharp tactical mind and unwavering dedication to Earth's survival. The final member of the team was Ethan Blake, a young hacker prodigy who had been instrumental in the development of the project. Though he was still a teenager, his genius had made him one of the most invaluable assets in the fight against the alien threat. Together, they were humanity's last hope, and their task was daunting. They had created something unlike any weapon the world had ever seen, a device capable of harnessing the very forces of nature, bending them to human will. But the weapon was still in its early stages, and no one was certain whether it would even work. The Xokthar's fleet had already begun to encircle Earth, their massive warships hovering over every major city, casting long shadows over the helpless populations below. The team worked tirelessly, knowing that time was running out. Every minute that passed saw more destruction, more cities falling to the might of the alien invaders. The Xokthar seemed untouchable, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. Yet, Dr. Kovac, General Hale, and Ethan remained focused. They couldn't afford to waste time on fear or doubt. They had to make Project Phoenix work, no matter the cost. As they tested the weapon in isolated chambers, they faced a growing series of problems. Each test brought them closer to success, but there was always something that went wrong. The energy core, a vital component of the device, would overload. The power surges were unpredictable, and on one occasion, the entire lab was nearly destroyed by an unexpected feedback loop. The device was unstable, and with each failed test, the pressure mounted. The aliens were advancing, their forces moving closer to the facility with every passing day. The world had no other option but to rely on these few individuals and their untested weapon. Despite the mounting pressure, the team pressed on. Dr. Kovac, with her calm and calculated approach, continued to work on stabilizing the energy field that would power the weapon, while General Hale began to plan for the inevitable confrontation. Ethan, his fingers flying over keyboards, worked tirelessly to hack into the Xokthar's communication systems, searching for any weakness they could exploit. There were moments of silence, when the weight of the situation seemed unbearable. But each of them had one thing in common: a burning desire to prove that humanity was not ready to simply fall. They were determined to show the Xokthar that Earth's fight had only just begun. The team grew closer with every passing day, bound by their shared purpose. They would often talk late into the night, planning their next move or discussing the little progress they had made. It was clear that they were up against impossible odds, but in the quiet moments, they shared a hope, a flicker of belief that somehow they could turn the tide. The Xokthar may have laughed at humanity's first attempts to fight back, but they had no idea what was coming. Still, despite their determination, they knew they had only a slim chance of success. The aliens were relentless, and their power was overwhelming. As the final days before the weapon's first real test arrived, Dr. Kovac stood by the lab's massive control panel, her eyes fixed on the readings. She could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she wouldn't let it stop her. "We have to do this," she whispered to herself. "We don't have a choice." With one final adjustment, the weapon was ready. The countdown began. But as the Zocthar's ships grew closer, their presence becoming more oppressive, a cold sweat ran down their backs. Would the weapon actually work? And even if it did, would it be enough to turn the tide? The team held their breath as the moment of truth approached, praying that their work would not only save them, but the entire planet. Earth's future was now in their hands, and time was running out. The Zocthar's invasion had reached a terrifying new phase. Massive warships, each the size of a small city, began to land on every major continent, casting long shadows over Earth's most populous cities. Within hours, landmarks that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Cities like New York, Tokyo, London, and Paris fell one by one, their once thriving streets now silent, the air thick with dust and smoke. In the chaos that followed, the world's communication networks were severed, leaving nations isolated and helpless. Global leaders scrambled for control, but there was no unified response. Panic gripped the populace as it became clear humanity was on the verge of extinction. However, amid the destruction, there was a flicker of hope. Deep beneath the earth, hidden away from the alien eyes that hovered above, the small team working on Project Phoenix was making progress. Dr. Elena Kovac, General Marcus Hale, and Ethan Blake had been toiling day and night, locked in the isolated research facility, their work barely keeping up with the alien assault. The pressure had been mounting, and yet, despite the endless challenges, something had clicked. Dr. Kovac, after weeks of failed tests and near catastrophes, had unlocked a vital breakthrough in their weapon's design, a quantum energy field that could manipulate spacetime itself. It was a concept that had been only theoretical, a mere whisper among the scientific community, but now it was real. The device they had been struggling to perfect for so long was no longer just a weapon. It was the key to turning the tide of war. With trembling hands, Kovac initiated the first small-scale test. The room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the machinery as the quantum core came to life. The air seemed to warp, a subtle distortion that could almost be felt. Ethan, his eyes glued to the monitors, held his breath. A flash of blue light erupted from the device, and a shockwave rippled outward, its energy expanding like a pulse across the atmosphere. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, the first signs of success. Just as the device had been intended, the shockwave disrupted the Zocthar's advanced technology. Their communications went down, their weapons faltered, and their ships wavered in the sky as if struggling against an invisible force. It was as though the very fabric of reality had been bent, just enough to give humanity a chance to fight back. The team stood frozen in awe, unable to believe their eyes. The unthinkable had happened. Project Phoenix had worked. The Zocthar were momentarily disoriented, their power momentarily halting, giving humanity the first real glimpse of victory. But the joy was short-lived. The Zocthar, now aware of the threat that had been unleashed, quickly regained their composure. Their ships began to move again, but this time, their movements were different. There was a deliberate, calculated precision to their actions. They had recognized the potential danger the device posed, and now they were coming for it. General Hale, his face grim, stared at the monitors, already calculating their next move. "They're coming," he said, his voice low and steady. "We don't have much time. We need to move the device now." The team sprang into action, gathering the equipment and preparing for a desperate escape. But it was already too late. Zocthar forces began to descend upon the facility, their ships blocking out the sky. They were coming to eliminate the last hope humanity had, Dr. Kovac's creation. The scientists had no illusions now. The Zocthar, would stop at nothing to prevent the weapon from being used again. They were determined to wipe out the resistance before it could even begin to make a difference. As the alien ships neared, the tension in the research facility grew unbearable. The team had moments, maybe an hour, before the Zokthar launched their final assault. Kovac and her team had no choice but to act quickly. The device was powerful, but so was the enemy. The battle for Earth's survival was about to take a new, terrifying turn. Would they be able to get the weapon to safety in time? Or would the Zokthar destroy humanity's last chance before it could even be fully realized? The seconds ticked by like hours, and the fate of the entire world rested on the shoulders of these few individuals. There was no turning back now. The breach had been made, and now the real fight was just beginning. As the alien forces closed in on the facility, the air was thick with tension. Zokthar ships hovered just outside the range of their defensive perimeter, their immense presence casting a shadow over the isolated research lab. General Hale and his team stood on the front lines, preparing for the inevitable. They had fought through so much, and now the time had come for the ultimate confrontation. The Zokthar were relentless. Their forces were too powerful, too advanced. Every attempt to delay them had failed, and now the fate of Earth rested on one final decision. The team of scientists, once filled with uncertainty, now faced a terrifying reality. The weapon, Project Phoenix, was ready. But there was one last obstacle. It required a human pilot to operate. The power of the quantum device was too great for mere machines to control, and it needed someone who could interface with it directly, someone willing to give everything to ensure humanity's survival. The choice was clear but agonizing. No one in the room was naive enough to think there was no risk, and the weight of that decision hung heavily on all of them. Dr. Kovac stood at the control panel, her face pale with the pressure of the moment. "We need to launch it now, or we'll lose our chance," she said, her voice breaking the silence. Her hands trembled as she looked at the device, its cold metal surface gleaming in the dim light. But it wasn't the weapon she was worried about. It was the person who would have to merge with it. It was Ethan. Ethan Blake, the young hacker who had helped design and perfect the quantum core, was the only one who could pilot the weapon. His connection to the technology was more than just technical. It was deeply personal. He had spent years studying it, understanding it on a level no one else could. The team had tried to find another way, any way to avoid using a human pilot. But time had run out. With the Zokthar closing in, they had no choice. The weapon had to be activated now. Ethan didn't hesitate. Despite the terrifying risks, despite the unknown consequences of merging his consciousness with the quantum field, he volunteered. "I'm the one who can do it," he said, his voice calm but filled with an unspoken determination. There was no fear in his eyes, just a quiet resolve. He knew the weight of his decision. He knew that by interfacing with the quantum device, he would be giving up everything. But he also knew that humanity's survival depended on it. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, allowing Dr. Kovac and General Hale to prepare him for the connection. Electrodes were attached to his skin, wires linking his body to the quantum device. As he sat in the chair, a strange sense of calm washed over him, despite the chaos unfolding outside the facility. The energy within the room hummed, and he could feel the machine pulsing, as if it were alive. His heart raced as the last adjustments were made, but his mind remained focused. He could hear the sound of the Zokthar's ships in the distance, their presence growing louder with each passing second. "Activate it," Ethan said, his voice steady. Dr. Kovac nodded and pushed a button. The machine whirred to life, and in an instant, Ethan's mind was drawn into the core of the device. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as though his consciousness was no longer bound by the limitations of time and space. The fabric of reality itself bent and stretched around him, as though the universe itself was being rewritten with every thought. He could feel the immense power coursing through him, raw, unrelenting, and infinite. Time was no longer linear. Everything, all at once, was in his control. He had become one with the quantum energy field. As the power surged through his veins, the entire facility seemed to vibrate with the force of the energy. Ethan could feel the laws of physics themselves breaking down, the universe stretching and warping under his command. In that moment, he was no longer just a human. He was a part of something much greater, something far beyond his understanding. He could feel the Xocthar forces approaching, their ships now just outside the facility's perimeter. They were too close. The moment of truth had arrived. "Do it now," General Hale ordered, his voice urgent. Ethan focused, his mind attuned to the energy field. With a single thought, he released the stored energy. A shockwave of pure, unrelenting power erupted from the quantum device, radiating outward like a storm of light. The very atmosphere seemed to shatter, as if the fabric of the universe had been torn apart. The shockwave rippled outward, striking the alien ships with the full force of the quantum field. For a moment, the Xocthar fleet faltered, their technology buckling under the sheer force of the attack. Ethan could feel the disorienting effect it had on their systems, and with each passing second, his control over the weapon grew stronger. But the energy coursing through him was almost too much to bear. His mind began to stretch and crack under the weight of it, but there was no turning back now. He had made his choice. The fate of the world rested in his hands. The moment Ethan unleashed the full power of Project Phoenix, everything changed. The air inside the facility crackled with raw energy, and the ground beneath him seemed to pulse, as if the very earth itself was reacting to the immense force he was now controlling. Ethan's mind, already stretched to its limits, began to blur with the vastness of the power coursing through him. The quantum energy field, now fully activated, began to distort the fabric of reality. Space and time, concepts that had once been firm and unyielding, warped around him like fluid. Above, the Xocthar fleet, confident in their superior technology, suddenly found themselves in a situation they could not comprehend. Their ships, once sleek and invincible, began to freeze mid-flight. Some became trapped in endless loops of time, their movements stuttering as if caught in a glitch. The first few alien vessels erupted in blinding flashes of energy, their powerful shields no match for the destructive force of the quantum weapon. The Xocthar's once certain arrogance quickly turned to panic. The very laws of physics seemed to betray them as their advanced technology buckled under the strain of the weapon's power. Ships that had once been indestructible now flickered and faltered, caught in an unending cycle of time loops. It was as if the universe itself had turned against them. The fleet, so sure of their victory, now found themselves helpless against an enemy they could not even understand. The sky above, the battlefield was filled with the violent pulses of energy as more Xocthar ships were torn apart, consumed by the shockwave of time distortion. The aliens, who had once scoffed at humanity's primitive attempts at resistance, were now facing a weapon beyond anything they had ever encountered. The battle had shifted in an instant. The tide of war, once firmly in the Xocthar's favor, was now turning in humanity's direction. The confidence that had once made the invaders so certain of their victory faltered, giving way to panic. But as the power surged, Ethan's control over the device began to slip. The force of the weapon, a power capable of warping both time and space, was too much for his human mind to bear. His senses were overwhelmed by the vastness of the energy, and his body began to tremble with the strain. His thoughts felt distant, as though he were no longer fully present. The very air around him seemed to vibrate with the tension of reality itself being pulled in every direction. Ethan could feel the weight of the energy pressing against him, every atom of his being straining under its force. His skin burned as if he were being torn apart from the inside, and his mind, once sharp and focused, now felt like it was splintering. The connection between his consciousness and the quantum device was faltering. He could hear the distant voices of Dr. Kovac and General Hale, but they sounded muffled, as if they were speaking from far away. His vision blurred, and for a moment, it felt as though he might lose himself entirely to the power he was controlling. Outside the facility, the chaos of the battlefield continued. The Zokthar fleet, now fractured and disoriented, continued to struggle against the unnatural distortions of time and space. Some of their ships had simply vanished, swallowed by the warping energy, while others were frozen in time, unable to move or defend themselves. Earth's final weapon had unleashed an unimaginable force, and for the first time, the invaders were experiencing the helplessness that had once plagued humanity. The tide of war was changing, but not without a cost. As Ethan struggled to maintain his grip on the device, he felt his consciousness slipping. He was no longer sure where the machine ended and he began. His heart raced as he fought to keep control, but the power surged higher, threatening to consume him entirely. He could hear his own breath, ragged and strained, as the world around him twisted. He had become both the weapon and its pilot, but he was beginning to wonder if he could hold on long enough to see it through. The Zokthar, now reeling from the overwhelming force of the time distortion, began to regroup, but it was clear that their once mighty fleet was no longer the unstoppable force it had once been. The shockwave had shattered their confidence, but the battle was far from over. And as Ethan fought to control the device, he knew that the weapon was only as strong as the human mind that wielded it. Would he survive the strain, or would the immense power destroy him before he could finish what he had started? As the Zokthar attempted to regroup, their retaliation was swift and merciless. A full-scale bombardment of Earth's last remaining defense facility was launched with terrifying precision. The alien fleet, though battered and broken, had not been defeated. Their ships, now regaining their composure, unleashed a devastating barrage of energy that struck the facility's outer defenses. Explosions rocked the ground, and the air was thick with the deafening roar of destruction. Inside the facility, General Hale and his team watched in horror as the walls shook and alarms blared, signaling the impending collapse of their last stronghold. The final wave of destruction was coming, and with it, the fate of humanity. But there was something far more pressing than the oncoming assault. Ethan, who had been holding the quantum device together with nothing but his mind and will, was beginning to deteriorate. The strain of merging his consciousness with the weapon was taking its toll. His body trembled violently, and his once sharp thoughts now felt like distant echoes. The quantum field, once stable, began to flicker. The energy he had been channeling for so long, so violently, was now unstable, threatening to unravel everything they had fought for. If the device failed, if it collapsed under the pressure, Earth would be lost. General Hale, his face grim with the burden of responsibility, turned to his team. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice cold with determination. "The Zokthar are launching their final strike. We must hold them off long enough for Ethan to activate the final pulse. If the weapon destabilizes now, we lose everything." Dr. Kovac, her eyes wide with disbelief, nodded, though it was clear the weight of the decision was suffocating. "We can't afford failure," she whispered. The truth was undeniable. Without the final pulse, humanity would be wiped out, and the weapon would be nothing more than a distant, failed hope. But even as she spoke, they all knew what had to be done. The pulse that Ethan was about to unleash would be cataclysmic, and it would require him to give up every last shred of his being. It was the only way to ensure the Zokthar fleet would be completely destroyed, sent spiraling into an uncontrollable chaos of time distortion. If the pulse was successful, the Zokthar would be obliterated, but at the cost of Ethan's life. The realization hit like a cold wave, but there was no other choice. Ethan had become the weapon, and in that moment, his sacrifice was inevitable. "General," Hale turned to face the remaining soldiers stationed at the facility's defenses. "Hold them back," he commanded. "Do whatever it takes to give him the time he needs." The soldiers, their faces grim but resolute, nodded and moved out to take their positions. They knew what was at stake. Earth's last defense was not a weapon of steel or fire. It was the life of one young man who had given everything to save the planet. The final battle was upon them. Ethan, barely conscious and struggling to stay connected to the device, felt the overwhelming weight of the decision. His body was now barely able to function, his mind slipping further from reality with each passing second. But his will was unbroken. He knew what he had to do. He could feel the pulse building, the energy gathering within the quantum field, ready to release. With the last of his strength, he focused, pulling the last threads of his consciousness into the core of the device. The room around him seemed to fade, and all that remained was the power that surged through him. "Do it now, Ethan!" Dr. Kovac's voice broke through the haze in his mind. "It's the only way!" With a final, desperate thought, Ethan activated the pulse. The energy that erupted from the device was unlike anything the world had ever seen. A blinding wave of light and power shot out in all directions, rippling through the atmosphere. The Zokthar fleet, already weakened and disoriented, was hit with the full force of the quantum field. Time itself seemed to collapse around them, their ships frozen or disintegrating in a violent swirl of distortion. The once mighty invaders were caught in an irreversible spiral, helpless against the force of nature itself. But the cost was devastating. Ethan's mind shattered under the strain, his consciousness splintering into 1,000 pieces as the power surged to its peak. His body, once a vessel for the weapon, could no longer withstand the energy. He could feel himself fading, slipping, into oblivion. His final thoughts, as the pulse reached its crescendo, were of humanity, of the world he had fought so hard to protect. The pain was unimaginable, but it was worth it. His sacrifice would ensure that Earth would live to see another day. As the final blast of energy dissipated, the Zokthar fleet was no more. The sky above the facility, once filled with the ominous ships of the invaders, was now empty. The battle was over. The war was won. But the price of victory had been high, and as the facility fell into silence, General Hale and Dr. Kovac knew that Ethan's sacrifice had saved them all. In the wake of the final pulse, the Zokthar fleet was in complete disarray. Their ships, once the harbingers of invincibility, were shattered, frozen in time, or consumed by the energy of the quantum field. The invasion was over. Earth had been saved, but the price of victory was steep. The world watched in a mixture of disbelief and sorrow as the remnants of the alien fleet retreated, their forces broken, and their command structure in chaos. The battle for Earth had been won, but at the cost of their hero, Ethan Blake. Ethan's sacrifice was felt across the globe. His name was etched into history as the one who had given everything to ensure humanity's survival. In every corner of the world, people mourned the loss of the young man who had become Earth's final weapon. Statues were erected, memorials built, and his story passed down from generation to generation. Dr. Kovac and General Hale, who had fought by his side, were hailed as the leaders of Earth's final stand. They had witnessed Ethan's incredible bravery, his willingness to sacrifice his life for the future of mankind. They had seen him fade away, his mind fractured under the weight of the quantum energy. But they knew that without him, humanity would not have survived. They became symbols of hope and resilience, standing as reminders of what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. However, the victory was bittersweet. As Earth began its slow recovery, something was unmistakably different. The quantum energy released by Project Phoenix had altered the very fabric of reality. Time, once a steady stream of seconds and minutes, had become fluid, bending and stretching in ways no one could fully comprehend. Days and nights no longer followed predictable patterns. People found themselves caught in loops, reliving moments they thought had passed. In some parts of the world, time seemed to stand still, while in others, it sped forward with no warning. The laws of physics that had once governed the planet now felt like mere suggestions. Humanity had won, but they were now living in a new world, a world where the very concept of time had been forever changed. Dr. Kovac and General Hale stood together on a quiet hill overlooking a city that had once been a war zone, now beginning the arduous process of rebuilding. The battle was over, but the work had just begun. The global governments had united in a way they never had before, and they were beginning the process of restoring their cities, their industries, their very way of life. The devastation had been immense, but humanity was nothing if not resilient. They had proven that they could survive, even against the most overwhelming odds. But as the world worked to rebuild, one question remained. How would humanity adapt to this new reality? It was clear that Earth would never be the same again. The quantum field created by Project Phoenix had left an indelible mark on the planet. People had to learn how to live in a world where time was no longer linear, and space was no longer as predictable as it had once been. New technologies were developed to help people navigate the complexities of this altered reality, and scientists worked around the clock to study the effects of the quantum energy on the planet. Some feared that the changes might be irreversible, that humanity had opened a door that could not be closed, but others saw it as an opportunity, a chance to explore new frontiers, to understand the very nature of time and existence in ways that had once been unimaginable. Despite the challenges ahead, there was an undeniable sense of pride among the people of Earth. They had faced a threat unlike anything the universe had ever seen, and they had triumphed. The Zokthar had laughed at humanity's primitive defenses, scoffing at the idea that Earth could pose any threat to their advanced technology. But now, as they retreated from the shattered remnants of their fleet, they knew the truth. Earth was not a planet to be underestimated. In the end, it wasn't just technology or firepower that had saved them. It was the unyielding will to survive, the spirit of humanity to fight back when all seemed lost. This was humanity's true final weapon. And with that weapon, they had forever changed the course of history. As the dust settled and the world began to heal, one thing was clear. Humanity had proven its place in the universe. It wasn't just a footnote in the story of the cosmos. It was a force to be reckoned with. The Zokthar had learned a harsh lesson. And though Ethan Blake was gone, his legacy lived on in every person who had fought, who had believed, who had survived. Earth had become more than just a planet. It had become a symbol that no matter how dark the odds, humanity would always rise.